Hello, I'm Ash, and welcome to the very first Last Beacon podcast. I'm sitting here with my brother, Mike. He is older, smarter, but not quite as charismatic, which is why I'm here, the only reason. Today we're going to be discussing the likely Democratic nominee and the Iowa caucus that was a total fiasco leading up to that, and time permitting, hopefully other awesome things. So, Mike, why don't you start with who you think has a shot, like a real legitimate shot at the nomination, even though there are still, plenty of people out there that are technically in the mix?
Well, to me right now, Bernie has no chance because they are all gunning for him. They seem quite desperate to block him when they could simply expel him from the party.
I know, but I think if they did that, they know that they lose everyone who likes him. You can't expel him from the party and expect to win these kids, no matter how much you pander, like Elizabeth Warren, who is the chief panda bear, and yes, I did use chief on purpose. But think about the consequences of Bernie not being their nominee, and that's not to say I think he will be, because I don't. But, I mean, you have people who are going to say, even more than last time, that he was definitely robbed, because the DNC is corrupt, and they are picking, I think whomever they feel like, quite frankly. And they might just walk away from it. It's the two extremes are kind of a woman who called into C-SPAN. I don't know if you saw that video.
I didn't.
Where she is talking to their anchor about watching Nancy Pelosi rip up Trump's speech in the House and how she's just sick of it. She can't put up with the fact that Democrats weren't standing for wins in America. It shouldn't matter who was responsible for it, whether it was bipartisan, something Democrats did, something Republicans did. You should want us to win. And she said, I can't be a Democrat anymore. So if it's that, she might be moderate enough that she's walking away from the Democratic Party. There are these kids who don't think that they're socialist enough who might walk away from the Democratic Party. It's very disheartening, I'm sure, to Democrats. We've heard from some of them this week, if they are moderate enough to think socialism is scary.
It's kind of surprising because it seems like there's been a slow drift in the extreme left direction for a while now.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that Chris Matthews suddenly remembered the Cold War over the weekend, and they're so desperate not to have Bernie that they're actually remembering how bad socialism is.
And to me, it depends on who you're watching, too, because Hardball with Chris, that's MSNBC.
Yes.
And Nick Searcy had posted on Twitter a video of people who I believe were from MSNBC. It definitely wasn't CNN. I don't think it was CNBC either. It was MSNBC, where they were explaining away Bernie's brand of socialism as socialism. They were using all of the talking points about how we have these Scandinavian countries with market-based economies that are socialist. And he basically, Nick Searcy had said, when you have to try this hard to convince people that this isn't communism, what does that say? So I think you're probably at a loss if you backed them because you were always a Democrat, like Chris Matthews was. And he loved Hillary. There were all those behind-the-scenes clips of him and Hillary Clinton. And their party could be over. Like, we could be legitimately witnessing the beginning of the end because they're just so divided, and it's really not all of these factions anymore, although they have some of that with the identity politics, and, It really is just, are you a radical leftist or not when you're on the left? And is that enough to destroy the entire party?
The weird thing is, and maybe it's their blindered elitism, which has been a problem for them for a while, but they seem to think they can use stagecraft to force Bernie out and not lose everyone. When, if they're going to lose him that way, I think it would be better to alienate them a little bit now by forcing Bernie out of the party, because, after all, he's not in the Senate as a Democrat. He's an independent.
I actually think the time to do that has passed. The time to do that was when he tried to run the first time.
Yes.
And if they let him run, and then all they're going to do now is say, you keep changing the rules to sabotage him. You let him run last time. This time it's just because, he's going to win. He's going to beat Biden. He's going to beat Buttigieg. He's going to beat everybody. And I think their backup, if they're not going to a brokered convention, is Pete Buttigieg. I think they can pass him off as enough of a moderate that maybe, he'll at least unite the party to an extent. I don't think he could possibly win. No, I don't think he would get the black vote.
No.
Nor do I think he deserves it. Every gay American that I know doesn't like him because he tries way too hard. Have you seen that like, I don't know if it was like a seesaw or a swing set or whatever that he was sitting on with his husband?
No.
Well, they're on this thing, and the thing that you focus on in the picture is Pete Buttigieg's eyes, which are looking directly toward the camera, like out of the corner of his eyes. He's just looking at the camera to make sure that, like, they're getting a cute picture. And it's all optics, so he can play the minority card and try to win people over, and I think that just pisses them off more.
Yes.
So if they picked him, he wouldn't win, but I think they have that in their back pocket, just because if they don't get somebody they do want, like Bloomberg, quite frankly, at a brokered convention, because it was way too late for him to jump in naturally, then they can at least control it enough that they could get somebody who's not like, hey, I'm a socialist. Because they're right that most Americans aren't ready for that. They wouldn't want that. They're not the kids screaming on Twitter. You point that out fairly regularly, they might be the loudest voices, but they're not a majority.
Yeah, a study done in the middle of last year found that a huge number of the most active Twitter posts come from a tiny minority of Twitter users. So if you look at Twitter, you get a really flawed impression of what the political climate is, even on Twitter. It's much further left than the reality would have us believe.
I would be interested to learn the actual numbers on Twitter, how many people are on the left that are on there versus the right. And, it's a small pocket of people, I'm sure, that are even getting on there, like, fighting with them. I mean, you saw firsthand last week when I posted something about mass graves, how many people just jumped on me. It was kind of baffling that from where we sit, no one should support the kind of policies that lead to breadlines and mass graves. And yet, there were 4 people commenting negatively on what I said.
And only one had half an argument, and hers was ultra specific. Talked about Bernie being a dove and how important that was to her. And sadly, that was the only thing that even resembled a coherent argument.
Yeah, the rest of it was just really ignorant stuff that, back to the Scandinavia thing. And also, it was non-interventionist, her argument. which, I mean, yeah, that's all well and good until, his staffer was right and he wants to start, killing rich people or something crazy, which, that's what communist revolutions usually look like. So, and the guy's a communist. I don't care what anybody says. They don't care enough, or they're too afraid to ask him, how have your views changed, or have they changed at all since you were 35 until now? Because, as Ben Shapiro points out, it's different if you're 17, 16 years old and saying really extreme things, and 35. The guy looks pretty much, the same as he did then. He's been 78, even though he's 73 or something, for decades, is how he looks. And I don't think he has changed. Like, to his credit, what they say, he's been fairly consistent. He's always been a communist. From the place he honeymooned to the hammer and sickle hanging up in his office when he was a mayor. So, good times. Tell me your theory on Steyer.
I think that Steyer has a dark horse shot because he has most of the attributes that Bloomberg has. He's a billionaire. He's got some success in outside of politics, but he doesn't have any of Bloomberg's ugly baggage. Bloomberg is Mr. Stop and Frisk, as you were quick to point out. He is widely derided by both New Yorkers and other people because he's not a really likable guy. He's got some famous statements that resurfaced last week about women and rape.
Which he and Sanders actually have in common.
Yes.
Really nasty.
Although, to be fair, Sanders are far worse.
Yeah, definitely.
Bloomberg is skeptical about rape claims. Biden believes that all women want to be raped. Biden, not Biden. Bernie.
Well, Biden,
Who knows what Biden
who knows what Biden believes, and he might believe that all little children want to be raped, because that's certainly the way he behaves around them when he gropes them and puts a little kid's pacifier in his mouth, like just happened.
Stealing pacifiers.
Sniffy McSnifferton, not Sleepy Joe, should definitely be his nickname.
But Steyer doesn't have any leadership experience in politics. Bloomberg was mayor of a major city, but he also wasn't fired from Lehman Brothers like Bloomberg was.
But who's talking about him? You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's also not well known.
Nobody is talking about him, so that's part of it. But, and that's the thing. The first time I saw him, because it's like, even though you hear about him and you read about him, I didn't actually see his picture until he was on the debate stage. Didn't know where he came from, and I was like, who the is this guy? Was my first thought, and I guess we've just learned what I'm going to do about swearing. Is just old school. I'm just muting myself with my own mouth, which is interesting that just happened. But yeah, I like to swear. I am not sorry about it, but definitely if we want these monetized, we'll go with that. So yeah, and as far as the Iowa caucus goes, there's not enough evidence of people, actually meddling with that you could say, oh, it was definitely Buttigieg, or, so I think it's really irresponsible that people are throwing that around as well.
Well, some have been quick to point out, never attribute to malice, which is easily explained by incompetence. And to believe that whether it's DNC or the Iowa State Democratic Party, that they are smart enough to sabotage the entire thing from the top down is more far-fetched than this is a garbage fire that no one planned, and that image that you posted of a dumpster with a fire in it floating away in a flooded river plain, that's perfect.
Yeah.
a caucus is strange because you don't vote, you caucus. You just show up and they count heads. They screwed up counting.
And that was pretty hilarious, that that woman saying she wanted her vote back, and it was like, come on, lady, I think everybody can see that you're in the closet. It's like, come on, that's why you have such a problem with this. So just fly free. You're like 50 years old. It's 2020. Just fly free. So I think we're good for today. Thank you for joining us for the very last Beacon podcast. Join us next time when we'll talk about something else.